Okay, so Steak and Kick have been making some headlines in the recent years in terms of numerous controversies, but mostly in the creator and streaming space. Now, in the last couple of months, both Steak and Kick have been making headlines in the motorsports, more specifically the F1 space, but for very different reasons. And what's been interesting is to watch the motorsports journalist talk about the seemingly benign things around Steak and Kick, which we'll get to in a second, and not actually talk about the sponsorship and what these companies are. And what I've come to understand is I don't think most of the motorsport journalists or pundits have any idea what Steak and Kick actually do and what they are in terms of platforms. So let's dig into this. Mostly in the motorsport space, the controversy has come about because the previously known team, Alfa Romeo Formula One team, is no longer going to be called Alfa Romeo. It's going to be called, and bear with me, Steak F1 Team Kick Sauber. But whilst most people in the motorsport space have been focusing on, is this the ugliest name in Formula One history, which I don't particularly care. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. No one's actually been mentioning why Steak and Kick are even in Formula One in the first place and what they get out of this deal. Now, I already brought up the legality of both having Steak and Kick as sponsors in Formula One because they were already sponsoring the Alfa Romeo team at the time. I already brought up the legality of having Steak as a sponsor of a Formula One team because Stake is a crypto online gambling site, and gambling in a lot of countries is still illegal. And then we discovered that in some races, it was Kick that became the main sponsor, both seen on the helmets, on the overalls or the race suits that they're wearing, and also they were swapping out the Stake logo for the Kick logo at certain races. And one of the biggest reasons for swapping out your logos is because it is illegal in that country. We've already seen this previously with nicotine sponsors. We saw this previously with alcohol sponsors. We saw this also previously with tobacco sponsors, and I think we're now seeing this again with both Steak and Kick. Now, the interesting thing between this company is it's the same owners that seem to own both Steak and Kick, and let's dig into it. So this is obviously going to be a video about naming rights, contentious F1 sponsors, swapping out sponsors and their logos and depending on the country in which we are racing, and also how brands use Formula One to get people to fall in love with their brand by association to Formula One, not specifically the products or the values that they stand for. And the reason why this became top of mind for me again as well is because we had the latest announcement of the Steak Kick Sauber team sponsoring one of the F1 Academy drivers. And this was the pitch and the visual that they use. And as you can see, it isn't Steak that is the prominent sponsor here, it is obviously Kick, which kind of makes sense because the F1 Academy has as drivers mostly young women between the ages, I think, of 16 and 20 something. So probably having as your main logo and sponsor a crypto online gambling site is maybe not the best look and feel. So here's where we are today, and here are the couple of updates that you need to be aware of. It is no longer the Alfa Romeo team. It is now known as the Steak Formula One Kick Sauber team. Also, the confusion is who has the naming rights. Is it Steak or is it Kick that has the naming rights for 2024 and 2025? And unsurprisingly, we are still going to see that swapping of logos and names depending on the countries in which we are racing, like we already saw last year in 2023. As a reminder, last year we saw Steak being replaced with Kick in the following countries. That would be Belgium, Australia, Spain, and Qatar. And we'll probably see the same this year, although I have a sneaky feeling that more countries are going to be added to that list this year as well. And this is where it also becomes interesting because I think Switzerland is probably going to be added to that list, and here's why. Gambling is closely controlled in Switzerland, and Sauber is actually based in Switzerland. And to be able to advertise gambling in that country, you need a specific license, a license that I believe they do not have. So what Sauber and Steak have gone and done is they have blocked the use of the platform Steak in countries like Switzerland. But here's the problem, and this is what they're aiming for, is Formula One is a global sport seen globally in many different countries. So whether you block the product in one country, that doesn't change the fact that the logo and the name is seen globally across the world at every given race weekend. And that's what they're obviously banking on. So technically, even though the product is not available in a country, you are still advertising to the citizens of that country where the product is illegal. So that's the motorsports and Formula One context, but you might also be asking yourselves, well, what the hell is Kick and what the hell is Steak and what do they have to do with each other and how are they connected? So let me dig into that a little bit. Kick has come about in the live streaming space and has very vocally positioned itself as the most rewarding live streaming platform that is out there with a deep focus on creators. And one of the biggest things they seem to have done is the payouts seem to be absolutely massive for the streamers, which is how it is positioning itself differently from the likes of Twitch, for example, or YouTube. But Kick is also backed by the founders of Stake, the gambling platform. And so they might argue that they are two different separate entities, but they seem to often come hand in hand. Many people have also questioned how they are getting the money to pay out so massively and compensate so massively the streamers that stream on Kick. And this is where Kick is well known for its 95-5% split, which means that Kick only takes 5% of the profits and 95% of the profit goes to the streamers. But it seems to be that they're only able to afford that because of the gambling website and that tie between Stake, the gambling website, and Kick, the live streaming platform. And the big pushback that they have received, that also Twitch has received, is that gambling websites and gambling in general is incredibly addictive. It is right up there with drugs and nicotine in terms of the addictive nature of it. This is why daily we keep hearing of countries banning the likes of gambling, both on Kick but also on Twitch. Just recently we saw this in Turkey. That being said, the counter argument to that is that having more competition and having more options for live streaming platforms is good. When you just have a monopoly like we had for many years with just Twitch, you know that Twitch can take advantage of the creators because the creators have nowhere else to go. So having the likes of YouTube adding live streaming as an option and having the likes of Kick in of itself is not a bad thing. It's where they're getting the money to fund it. And one thing that you will notice very prominently on Kick is the type of content that you find and that is deemed okay on Kick is very loose. Now let's talk a little bit about Stake. Stake for a long time, or for as long as I have seen it, has been positioned as a crypto online gambling site. The crypto side of things seems to have decreased a little bit, and I keep seeing it put forward as just an online gambling site. Whether that makes it any better, that's up for debate. It's also really interesting in the positioning of both Stake and Kick in the Formula One and the motorsport world. What seems to be prominently put forward and spoken about is the live streaming component, not the gambling component of Stake. Even though it is Stake that is prominent and Stake isn't the actual live streaming platform, it is Kick that is the live streaming platform. It's confusing at best. And this is what's fascinating, because it's a pretty newish company, both Stake and Kick, which means that most people are still unaware of it, which means it's the perfect time for them right now to sponsor a sport like Formula One, where most of the pundits and most of the writers and most of the journalists have probably never used either Stake or Kick recently and probably not aware of either of these platforms. Basically, now is the time to fly under the radar, and they wouldn't be the first sponsors to try their luck, see how much they can push their brand, get the exposure, get the credibility, get the relevancy of being attached to a sport that is very relevant right now, which is Formula One, and see how far they can take it until the day that someone says, hey, wait up, hold up a minute. We don't actually allow for that type of sponsorship, whether that comes from the series, whether that comes from the FIA, or whether that comes from the regulators at a national or a pan-European or even a global level. And maybe one last thing worth sharing is that Stake is no stranger to sponsoring sports. They sponsor series like UFC. They also sponsors of Everton FC, Watford. So they are no strangers to sponsoring big sporting events and big sporting series. And in terms of the size of this deal, like with all things in sponsorship and Formula One, the details are very hard to find, but it looks like it's upwards of 100 million for the title sponsorship of the Sauber team. In terms of the crypto angle of all of this, it's really interesting to go back not that far, only in 2022. I think almost all of the teams had a crypto sponsor of one form or the other, and those crypto sponsors have ever so slightly dropped off. They're still very much there, but 2022 was definitely a big boom in terms of crypto sponsorship in Formula One, and it's been interesting how silently they have been excluded from the sport in one way, shape or form. And you might be asking yourself, what does Stake or Kick gain from all of that? Well, they gain the relevancy of being attached to a sport like Formula One that is incredibly relevant right now. They gain the global viewership and global eyeballs on a product that, even though it's not available in certain countries. What's also interesting is you hear a lot from both the team but also the sponsor of how big streaming is becoming, and that shift away from maybe a linear TV platforms and linear TV consumption to streaming platforms. But what's really interesting is the broadcasting rights in Formula One are very strict. We're not going to have any live streaming broadcast anytime soon in Formula One. Remember the story of when Lando Norris was streaming on Twitch, as he used to do quite a bit back in the day and still does today. And I think he was with Carlos Sainz at the time. I think this must have been 2021. And they were streaming. You couldn't see anything behind them. There was a white wall behind them. And their comms director had to walk in on the stream and say, hey, the FIA isn't happy. You're going to need to cut down the stream right now. So no races are going to be streamed on Kick. No additional content is going to be found on Kick, in my opinion, anytime soon, especially anything that has to do with on-track battle cars or drivers. So this is one sponsorship that I'm going to be tracking like a hawk in the season of 2024. And I can't wait to see how it all pans out.